back into Illustrator and see what are the components of this software. So as I said, we have an artboard, and we have a series of tools. Everything you do in Illustrator, keep in mind, is a path, so it's a vector piece. How do I input content in Illustrator? Many ways, obviously. One of which is you can simply go in this part of your palette and say, okay, I'm going to input, I want to create a rectangle, for example. So you click rectangle tool, click it and drag, and there it is. I got my rectangle done. The rectangle, just like I was highlighting, can have a stroke and a fill. So I can go in here and say, hey, I want to fill it with red. I simply double-clicked and chose red. And obviously it has a black stroke that I cannot see as much because it's very thin and has that bluish bounding box. But I could go in the stroke palette and say, I want the stroke to actually be 10 points. And there it is. Just like I did with the rectangle, I can create a, for example, rounded rectangle tool, an ellipse tool. Let's create an ellipse. By default, we'll have the colors that I picked earlier. I'm going to go and choose a different color. Also, what you can decide to do, if you say, you know what, I actually don't like the stroke. I don't want the stroke. Or obviously you can remove the fill as well, but you can go in here and say, I don't want the stroke, and now that object doesn't have the stroke. As well as, instead, if you go in here and you say, I don't want the fill, and now that object doesn't have the fill. Keep in mind that the shortcut we used in Photoshop work as well now. So for example, if I'm on a different tool and I want to go on the selection tool, I hit V and I go to my move tool or selection tool. That tool allows me to grab and move whatever I want anywhere I want it. But what if I actually want to change the shape of this object? How can I do that? You can obviously, through this bounding box, click and drag and make it bigger, make it smaller, make it rotate it if you want. This is the free transform. We'll talk about transformation tools, obviously, apart the free transform. But what if I really want to change the shape in terms of making this belly a bit less, let's curve or something? In that case, instead of using this tool, the move tool, what you want to use is this one. It's called the direct selection tool. This time the shortcut is A. And it's this basically white arrow that allows you to, when you mouse over an anchor and click on it, allows you to grab it and move it. And please do it with me. Create a shape, like a circle or whatever you want to create. And then select with the white arrow one of the points, these are called anchor points, and grab them and kind of drag them around. Also notice that these anchor points have what I call handles. And if you grab onto the handle and you start rotating it, it starts dramatically changing the shape of your object.
Does that not work with like squares and rectangles?
It works with squares or rectangle. You can go in here and grab this point and drag it out. Just with squares and rectangles, you don't have the handles. The handles are what allows you to create curves. Gives that shape a curvature. In the case of the triangle and rectangle, you just have straight lines. But even for them, you can click on any anchor points and drag it anywhere you want it. And now I created kind of like a boomerang shape. So if you want to input any shape in Illustrator, as long as you go under this shape tool, and look, you can have a star even. I'm going to go here and create a star and give it a different color. Give it more like a vibrant color instead of like a yellow. And there we are. So we have kind of a series of shapes that we can create. And again, if I decide I want to change the star because I want this part to be bigger, I just grab onto the anchor and drag. And now my anchor points is, down here, and the star has, an anomaly, in quote. Another thing I want to show you is just like in Photoshop, we have something called layers. By default, Illustrator put everything on the same layer. How do I change that? What if I want to move object across layers? What do I do? Yes, Zach.
Create a new layer and then down arrow and then drag whatever shape you want on the new layer.
That's one way to do it. Like I'm going to create a new layer, and Zach says you go with a down shape. But let's say that this layer 1 had actually 90 different paths in there. Do I want to go through the 90 different paths? No. So what do? You select it on your desktop, and you'll see, I'm going to close this, that a little square showed up right here. That little square is a signifier of the object that you just clicked on. And when you take that little square and drag it to the new layer, it's moving that object to the new layer. So that's how you kind of start transferring content across layers. So I'm going to have you do an exercise right now. I'm going to have you open the Illustrator exercises, and I want you to open the exercise called Exercise 1 Selecting. And I want you to drag it onto Illustrator. That exercise has actually fairly complex shapes, just to make it a little bit more exciting. We could have had just doodles, squares, and circles, but I thought it would be more fun to look at this in a different way and say, hey, look, how are these pieces made? For example, this pair is made by a bottom path, a top path, another path that is the little picket here, and then the shadows. The stem is a separate path. So we have these different paths in there. Now, if I select it with the black arrow and I click, the entire shape gets selected. If I want to actually select a subcomponent because I want to actually change it or something, all I have to do is select it with the white arrow right here, and now I selected just that one piece. And let's say I want to move it or do something with it because I don't want the light up there and I want to delete it, for example. I can simply hit delete and it's gone. I'm going to undo that. Underneath the white arrow, there's another one called the group selection tool. And I confess I've never fully understood why the group selection tool totally exists. What that does is select a subcomponent of a group. So for example, this pair is a group. Trust me on that one. And actually we can find out by selecting it with the black arrow, going in the layers, and you'll see when I open it up that that group that is down here, that object says group, right? So it is a group. So I could select a subcomponent of it using this arrow, this group selection tool, and I click on it. And it will select that subcomponent. But the white arrow does pretty much the same exact thing. So I've never fully understood why we have two of them. I can confess and I even searched a little bit on Illustrator. But I couldn't really figure it out. Just to have an extra tool, I guess, that might help. But that's kind of, both of those, that's what they do. Allow you, I would imagine that this subgroup, this one, the group selection tool, just allows you to select a piece, versus the white arrow also allows you to select the anchor points. You can go in here and change this anchor point to be somewhere else. So that might be the difference, but it's quite minor. So what I want you to do is I want you to go with the black arrow, create a brand new layer, and let's call it pair. I'm going to double click on it and say pair, enter. And I want you to select the pair, grab that little square, and move it to the pair layer. Then I want to create a new layer, and I want you to call it, for example, pond. Pond is a little bit more tricky. Let me show you why. When you select the pond, it's a bunch of different pieces, and you can select it, honestly, by clicking and dragging over everything, and that will select the entire thing. That's what you want to do. It means be careful you don't just click on the grass, because it will only take the grass. That is kind of a bummer. So what you want to do is select the entire pond, and then you want to move it to the layer called pond. And you would repeat that for all these objects. For example, for the strawberry, you can create a new layer, double click, say strawberry, and then you would want to click on the strawberry and move it to that new layer. So pretty straightforward, pretty simple. Remember, when you have multiple one, you can just click and drag. So for the stars, you select it all. Use a marquee to select it. But what I want you to do is I'm going to give you a few minutes to separate these objects all into different layers. Remember, the leaves can all be on one layer, all of them. So that's pretty much for now what I want you to do. One thing I want to show you guys is you notice that the pond, the grass is kind of thick and bulky. If you selected just the grass and you went right up here and said, hey, I want it to be thinner, for example, you choose a different brush right here, and now the grass is nice and thin, in fact, a little bit painterly. So keep in mind that if you have a certain stroke that you don't like, you can select it and go up here and choose a different stroke. And obviously we'll go more sophisticated. Like if I want to have it more looking like watercolor right here, there we are. Now it doesn't look great, but is a possibility. I'm just saying that you can change something you don't like. As long as eventually you have it all divided into separate layers, I'll be very, very happy. So I'm going to give you a few minutes to do that. In the meantime, I will come around and help the ones that, are maybe struggling with something.